I'm Commander Julia Hale, 40 years old, and I built my career the long way. Scholarship kid, ROTC, deployments, one promotion at a time. And for years, I poured myself into my family, especially my younger sister. Money, time, loyalty, you name it, I showed up. But on her wedding day, when she told me to stay away from the VIPs and called me a nobody in front of her new in-laws, something in me shifted. And when the general walked in, recognized me instantly, and said, "Commander, it's an honor," everything changed. Have you ever been dismissed or humiliated by someone you only ever tried to help? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, drop where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw a line after someone crossed one, hit like and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, respect, and taking your power back. What happened next surprised everyone, including me. I stood in the kitchen of my childhood home, half listening to Madeline's voice rising from the living room. She'd been talking about centerpieces for the past 20 minutes, and I'd learned long ago that my role in these conversations was to nod and agree. I was the older sister by 4 years, but somewhere along the way, our dynamic had calcified into something else entirely. I became the steady one, the person who showed up, handled things, made sure the details didn't fall through. Madeline became the one everyone worried about pleasing. Growing up, I'd been the responsible child. Straight A's, ROTC scholarship, part-time jobs to help with expenses. Madeline had been different, charismatic, social, always gravitating toward whatever seemed most prestigious at the moment. Our parents praised my accomplishments, but they said Madeline deserved nice things. I never quite understood the distinction, but I accepted it. That was simply how our family worked. I joined the Navy at 22, commissioned as an ensign fresh out of the academy. Madeline went to a small liberal arts college, studying communications with vague plans about working in media or fashion. I paid for half her first year with money I'd saved from my ROTC stipend. When she needed help with internship applications, I edited her resume at midnight between training exercises. When she couldn't make rent 1 month during her junior year, I covered it without telling our parents. She thanked me once, briefly, then never mentioned it again. The military became my world in ways my family never fully grasped. I deployed multiple times, humanitarian missions in Southeast Asia, Joint Task Force operations in the Mediterranean, NATO exercises that took me to a dozen countries. I advanced steadily through the ranks, lieutenant junior grade, lieutenant, lieutenant commander. By my mid-30s, I'd made O4 and specialized in operational planning, the unglamorous work of coordinating logistics, personnel, and resources across multiple branches and allied nations. It was detail-oriented, demanding, and deeply satisfying in ways I couldn't easily explain to civilians. Madeline's life diverged sharply from mine. She moved to the city, worked in event planning for a few years, then transitioned into something she called brand consulting. What that meant exactly, I was never sure. But she attended the right parties, joined the right professional groups, and gradually surrounded herself with people who had money, connections, or both. She dated a venture capitalist for 2 years, then a political aide, then someone whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels. Then she met Evan Mercer at a charity gala. Evan worked in tech operations management, legitimate work, nothing flashy, but his last name carried weight. His father was Lieutenant General Douglas Mercer, a 3-star Army officer with a long and distinguished career. Madeline called me the night she met Evan, breathless with excitement. She didn't talk much about Evan himself. She talked about his family, their connections, the world she was about to enter. I was happy for her genuinely. I wanted my sister to find someone good. But as the engagement progressed, something shifted. The imbalance between us, always present but manageable, began to intensify. Madeline stopped asking about my work entirely. When I mentioned an upcoming deployment, she said, "That's nice," and changed the subject back to wedding planning. When I told her I'd been promoted to Commander 05, a significant milestone, she said, "Oh, great," without looking up from her phone. The wedding consumed everything. Madeline threw herself into it with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She hired a planner, then overrode most of the planner's decisions. She created spreadsheets, mood boards, vendor comparison charts. She visited venues until they all blurred together. And she leaned on me not as a sister, but as a resource. When her original bridal shower venue fell through 2 weeks before the event, I paid for the replacement. I used 5 days of leave to attend fittings, vendor meetings, and a last-minute tasting session when the caterer changed their menu. I listened to hours of anxious monologues about floral arrangements and whether the invitations were too formal or not formal enough. I reassured her, supported her, and absorbed her stress without complaint. Madeline never said thank you. Instead, she'd say things like, "It's the least you can do," or "I'd do the same for you," even though we both knew she wouldn't. I told myself it was just wedding stress, that she'd return to normal once everything was over. I wanted to believe that. But then she started rewriting history. At the bridal shower, one of her friends asked how we'd gotten along growing up. Madeline smiled and said, "Julia was always the difficult one. Very intense, you know? She never really supported my dreams." I was standing 10 feet away. She knew I could hear her. I said nothing, just refilled my drink and moved to another room. A week before the wedding, I flew in early to help with final preparations. Madeline met me at our parents' house with a stack of printed schedules and a list of tasks she needed completed. She didn't ask about my flight. She didn't ask how I was doing. She handed me the list and said, "I need all of this done by Thursday." Our parents watched from the kitchen, uncomfortable but silent. My father caught my eye once and gave me a look that might have been sympathy or apology. My mother busied herself with coffee mugs, pretending not to notice the tension. That night, Madeline sat me down in her old bedroom, surrounded by wedding binders and fabric samples. She looked exhausted and wired at the same time, her hands moving restlessly through pages of notes. "The Mercer family is very refined," she said. "They have high standards. I need this weekend to be perfect." "It will be," I said. "You've planned everything down to the minute. I need you to understand something." She looked at me directly for the first time all day. "This is the most important weekend of my life. I can't have anything go wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong. I mean it, Julia. No awkwardness. No drawing attention. Just blend in." I stared at her, trying to understand what she was really saying. "Madeline, I'm your sister. I'm going to be there supporting you. That's all." She didn't look reassured. She looked at me like I was a problem she hadn't yet figured out how to solve. Then she stood up, gathered her binders, and left the room without saying goodnight. I sat alone in the dark, listening to her footsteps fade down the hallway. For the first time, a thought formed clearly in my mind. She doesn't see me as her sister anymore. She sees me as someone who might embarrass her. Someone who doesn't belong in the world she's trying to enter. I'd spent years supporting Madeline, believing that family meant showing up even when it was hard. But sitting there in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of her carefully constructed perfect life, I wondered if I'd been supporting her or enabling her. If all my help had simply taught her that she could take without giving, demand without thanking, and treat me like an obligation rather than a person. The wedding was in 3 days. I told myself I'd get through it quietly, cause no problems, and then return to my ship and the work that actually valued me. I didn't know yet how wrong that plan would turn out to be. The morning of the rehearsal dinner, Madeline's anxiety reached a new pitch. She'd barely slept, and it showed in the sharp edge of her voice, the way she snapped at the bridesmaids over minor details. I tried to stay out of her way, handling the small tasks she'd delegated to me without drawing attention. I'd brought my service dress blue uniform for the rehearsal dinner. It wasn't required, but I thought it might be appropriate given that the Mercer family was military. Formal, respectful, a nod to the world Evan's father inhabited. I laid it out in my room at our parents' house that afternoon, making sure everything was pressed and ready. Madeline appeared in my doorway without knocking. She glanced at the uniform and her expression tightened. "You're not wearing that," she said. I looked up from my shoes. "I thought it would be appropriate. General Mercer is Army, and I don't care what you thought. You're not wearing it." "Madeline, it's just a uniform. It's respectful." She stepped into the room, her voice dropping to something cold and precise. "This weekend isn't about you. I don't need you drawing attention or making this about your career. Just wear a normal dress like everyone else. It's not about drawing attention. It's about showing respect to who? My future father-in-law?" You don't even know him. You're doing this to make yourself feel important, and I'm telling you not to. I sat down on the edge of the bed, genuinely confused. Madeline, where is this coming from? From years of watching you act like you're better than everyone else because you have some military job nobody understands. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were true, but because they revealed what she actually thought of me. I'd never acted superior about my service. If anything, I downplayed it around my family because I knew they didn't fully grasp what I did. I didn't talk about deployments, operations, the weight of command. I kept that part of my life separate because I thought it made things easier for everyone. I've never acted like that, I said quietly. You don't have to act. You just are. She crossed her arms. Everything's always been easy for you. School, career, promotions. I've had to work for everything, and now I finally have something good, and I need you to not ruin it. I wanted to remind her about the tuition I'd paid, the rent I'd covered, the countless hours I'd spent helping her build the life she was now telling me had been so hard. But I knew it wouldn't matter. She'd rewritten our history into something that made her the victim and me the privileged one. Arguing would only confirm her narrative. Fine, I said. I'll wear a dress. She didn't thank me. She just nodded and left. I sat there for a long time, staring at the uniform I wouldn't wear. I'd spent decades earning the rank that uniform represented. I'd led sailors through crises, coordinated operations that saved lives, made decisions that kept people safe. And my sister saw it as me trying to feel important. That evening, I wore a simple navy dress to the rehearsal dinner. Madeline barely acknowledged me. She seated me at a table far from the family, with distant relatives and plus ones I didn't know. I watched her work the room, performing a version of herself that seemed designed to impress rather than connect. She laughed too loudly at Evan's uncle's jokes. She complimented Mrs. Mercer's dress with an enthusiasm that felt calculated. She was trying so hard to belong that she'd stopped being herself. General Mercer hadn't arrived yet. He was flying in the next morning, Evan explained during his toast. Some last-minute work obligation that couldn't be rescheduled. Madeline's face fell when she heard that, though she tried to hide it. The whole evening had been staged around his presence, and now the lead actor was missing. After dinner, I helped clean up while the bridesmaids took photos in the garden. One of Evan's cousins approached me at the bar, asking polite questions about what I did. Before I could answer properly, Madeline appeared at my elbow. Julia works in logistics, she said brightly. Very organized, very detail-oriented. Nothing glamorous, but someone has to do it. The cousin nodded politely and moved on. Madeline shot me a warning look. Don't correct me, don't elaborate, don't make this complicated, and then drifted away to another conversation. Logistics. 30 years of service reduced to a word that made me sound like a warehouse manager. I could have corrected her. I could have explained that operational planning at the O5 level involved coordinating thousands of personnel, millions of dollars in resources, and strategic decisions that affected international relations. But I didn't. I just finished my drink and left early, claiming exhaustion. That night, I called Lieutenant Commander Adriana Reyes, my XO. She was one of the few people who understood both sides of my life, the professional and the personal. I'd told her about Madeline before, in the careful way you tell colleagues about family complications without quite admitting how bad they are. How's the wedding? She asked. It's fine. That bad? I laughed to spite myself. She introduced me to someone as working in logistics. Made it sound like I processed shipping orders. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Did you correct her? No. Why not? Because it would have embarrassed her. And apparently that's my job this weekend, not embarrassing her. Commander, with respect, that's not your job. Your job is to lead a combat-ready unit and make strategic decisions under pressure. What your sister thinks of your career is her problem, not yours. I knew she was right, but knowing didn't make it easier. She asked me not to wear my uniform tomorrow. To your own sister's wedding? To the rehearsal dinner. She said it would draw attention. Reyes made a noise that might have been a laugh or a scoff. You know what draws attention? Insecurity. Your sister's going to learn that the hard way. We talked for a few more minutes, mostly about ship business and upcoming evaluations. The familiar rhythm of work talk steadied me. When we hung up, I felt more myself again, less like the disappointing older sister, more like the officer I'd worked decades to become. The wedding was tomorrow. I told myself I just needed to get through one more day. I woke up at 0600 out of habit, even though I had nowhere to be until noon. The house was quiet except for my mother moving around downstairs, probably making coffee and worrying about details she had no control over. I stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling and trying to prepare myself mentally for whatever the day would bring. My service dress blue hung in the closet. I'd brought it despite Madeline's objections, some stubborn part of me refusing to leave it behind entirely. The uniform felt like armor, not against physical threats, but against the version of myself my sister wanted me to be. Small. Diminished. Easy to explain away. I got up, showered, and put on the dress I'd worn to the rehearsal dinner. It was fine. Appropriate. Forgettable. Exactly what Madeline wanted. Downstairs, my mother had set out breakfast, bagels, fruit, coffee. My father sat at the table reading news on his tablet, occasionally glancing toward the stairs as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. He'd been a high school teacher for 40 years, skilled at reading tension and knowing when to stay quiet. Big day, my mother said, setting down a mug in front of me. It'll be beautiful, I said automatically. She hesitated, then sat down across from me. Your sister is very stressed. I know. She doesn't mean some of the things she says. I looked at her carefully. Which things specifically? My mother's face flickered with something like guilt. She's just worried about making a good impression. The Mercer family is, well, they're used to a certain standard. And do you think I don't meet that standard? That's not what I said. But it's what Madeline thinks. My father lowered his tablet. Julia, your sister has always been intimidated by you. You have to know that. The statement caught me off guard. Intimidated? She acts like I'm an embarrassment. Because she's intimidated, he repeated. You've accomplished things she can't even conceptualize. She doesn't know how to relate to you anymore, so she diminishes what you do. It's not right, but it's what she does. I'd never heard him articulate it that clearly before. She told someone I work in logistics. Like I'm a supply clerk. My mother winced. My father just nodded, unsurprised. Are you going to say something to her? I asked. Would it help? I thought about that. Probably not. Then we'll get through today, and then things will settle down. I wanted to believe that. But sitting at that kitchen table, I had the distinct feeling that things wouldn't settle down. They'd just calcify into whatever shape they'd already taken. Madeline would continue treating me like a supporting character in her life. My parents would continue smoothing over the tension without addressing it. And I'd continue showing up, absorbing it, because that's what I'd always done. At 11:30, we drove to the venue, a renovated estate with gardens and a view of the hills. Madeline had chosen it for its elegance and its exclusivity. Only 150 guests, all carefully selected. I'd seen the seating chart. I was at table 12, near the back, with distant cousins and family friends who wouldn't ask complicated questions. The bridal suite was chaos. Madeline sat in front of a mirror while two people worked on her hair and makeup simultaneously. Bridesmaids fluttered around adjusting dresses, looking for lost earrings, taking endless photos. Someone handed me a glass of champagne I didn't want. Madeline caught my reflection in the mirror. Her eyes went to my dress, scanning for any detail that might be wrong or attention-seeking. Finding nothing to criticize, she looked away. Has the general arrived yet? One of the bridesmaids asked. Evan texted 20 minutes ago. He's on his way from the airport. The energy in the room shifted. Everyone seemed to stand a little straighter, speak a little more carefully. General Mercer's presence hung over the day like a weather system we were all tracking. Madeline's hands were shaking. The makeup artist told her to hold still, but she couldn't seem to manage it. She kept checking her phone, reading and rereading messages from Evan. He's going to love everything, one of the bridesmaids said. You've planned the perfect day. Madeline didn't look convinced. She looked terrified. 30 minutes before the ceremony, I stepped outside for air. The gardens were filling with guests, military families in dress uniforms, civilians in formal wear, a photographer capturing details. I found a quiet corner near the rose beds and tried to center myself. That's when Madeline found me. She walked over quickly, her dress swishing against the stone path. Her face was tight with barely controlled anxiety. I need to talk to you. Okay. She glanced around, making sure no one was close enough to hear. The general is here. He's in the venue with Evan and Mrs. Mercer. That's good. Everything's ready. Julia. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. I need you to understand something. This family is very important. Very connected. I can't have anything go wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong. I mean it. I need you to stay out of the way. Don't talk to the general. Don't try to introduce yourself or make conversation. Just be invisible. I stared at her. You want me to be invisible at your wedding? I want you to not embarrass me. Her voice cracked slightly. Please, Julia. For once in your life, can you just not make everything about you? The unfairness of it hit me like a physical force. I'd spent the entire weekend, the entire engagement, really making sure nothing was about me. I'd paid for things, shown up for things, absorbed her stress and her insults without pushing back. And she was standing here, 30 minutes before her ceremony, telling me I made everything about myself. I've never made anything about me, I said quietly. You don't have to try. You just exist, and everyone pays attention. Meanwhile, I've worked my whole life to get to this point, and I need you to let me have this. Madeline, stay away from the general. Her voice went hard. Don't introduce yourself. Don't try to talk about the military or impress him with your job. You are a nobody here. Do you understand? A nobody. Several people had stopped nearby, close enough to hear. I saw a bridesmaid's eyes widen. One of the vendors pretended to adjust a flower arrangement while clearly listening. Madeline didn't seem to care. She was too far into her panic to notice or care about who heard. Don't embarrass me, she said again. Then she turned and walked back toward the bridal suite, leaving me standing alone in the garden. I stayed there for a long time, feeling the weight of what she'd said settle into my chest. Not the words themselves, I'd heard worse in command situations. But the casual cruelty of them. The ease with which she'd reduced me to nothing in order to make herself feel bigger. A nobody. 30 years of service. 3 deployments. 2 combat ribbons. A Bronze Star. A promotion record that put me in the top 5% of my cohort. And my sister saw me as a nobody. I walked slowly back toward the venue, my mind quiet and clear. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt exactly. I was simply finished. Finished pretending her behavior was acceptable. Finished making excuses. Finished being small so she could feel big. The ceremony would start soon. I'd stand in my assigned spot, smile for the photos, and fulfill my role. But something fundamental had shifted. Madeline had finally said out loud what she'd been communicating for years. And I'd finally heard it clearly enough to stop ignoring it. The ceremony was flawless, at least, by external standards. The weather cooperated, the string quartet played without a hitch, and Madeline looked beautiful walking down the aisle on our father's arm. I stood with the other guests, watched Evan's face as he saw her, and felt nothing but a distant, detached observation of the scene. The general sat in the front row, 3 stars on his dress uniform catching the afternoon light. He was tall, composed, with the kind of presence that came from decades of command. He stood when Madeline entered, sat when directed, and maintained the perfect posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime in formal ceremonies. I was seated 12 rows back. Nobody looked at me. Nobody spoke to me. I was exactly as invisible as Madeline had demanded. The vows were traditional, the kiss was met with applause, and the recessional carried the wedding party back down the aisle in a wave of smiles and music. I followed the crowd toward the reception area, keeping my distance, staying out of the way. The cocktail hour was held in the garden where Madeline had told me I was a nobody just an hour before. Servers circulated with champagne and appetizers. Guests clustered in groups, the military families gravitating toward each other with the easy recognition of people who shared a culture. I stood near the edge, watching. One of the bridesmaids approached me once, asked if I was okay, then drifted away when I said I was fine. My parents were busy with hosting duties, greeting guests, and accepting congratulations. I was genuinely alone, and for the first time all weekend, I didn't mind. Then the general arrived at the cocktail hour. He moved through the space with his wife, greeting family members and friends. He had the manner of someone comfortable with attention, not seeking it, but not avoiding it either. People straightened slightly when he approached, their body language shifting into something more formal without quite becoming stiff. I was standing near the rose beds when he entered my section of the garden. He was speaking with Evan's uncle, some story about a joint exercise in Germany. I started to move away, to give them space and honor Madeline's demand that I stay invisible. Then he turned, mid-sentence, and his eyes landed on me. He stopped talking. His expression shifted from polite attention to something sharper recognition, mixed with surprise. He excused himself from the conversation and walked directly toward me. My mind raced through possibilities. Did I know him? Had we crossed paths at some ceremony or a briefing I'd forgotten? I ran through my recent assignments, trying to place his face, but came up empty. He stopped 3 feet away and his posture shifted subtly, not quite to attention, but to something more formal than the casual cocktail hour warranted. "Commander Hale," he said. "It's an honor." The garden went quiet around us. Several conversations stopped mid-sentence. I saw Evan's head turn, confusion on his face. And somewhere behind the general, I saw Madeline, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. "General Mercer," I said carefully. "I didn't realize we'd met." "Operation Pacific Relief," he said. 3 years ago. You coordinated the naval logistics that got supplies to Mindanao after the typhoon." The memory clicked into place. I'd been lieutenant commander then, working Joint Task Force operations in the Philippines. The Army had been running the overall operation, but Navy logistics handled the transport of relief supplies from our ships to the affected areas. I'd spent 72 hours straight coordinating movements, personnel, and resources to cut through red tape and get food and medical supplies to people who needed them. "I remember the operation," I said. "I didn't realize you were overseeing it." I reviewed every after-action report from that deployment. "Your logistics plan was exemplary, clear thinking under pressure, creative problem-solving, and you cut our timeline by 3 days. Those 3 days saved lives." I didn't know what to say. Around us, people were starting to stare. Evan had moved closer, his expression shifting from confusion to something else. And Madeline, I could see her in my peripheral vision, standing absolutely still, her face drained of color. "Thank you, sir," I said simply. I didn't know Evan was marrying Commander Hale's sister. I would have said something sooner. He smiled slightly. Though I suppose that's not the usual way people introduce family members at weddings. "No, sir. It's not." He nodded once, a gesture of respect between peers, and then moved on to greet other guests. But the damage, or perhaps the revelation, was complete. The conversations around us resumed slowly, people processing what they'd just witnessed. A 3-star general had recognized a Navy commander and praised her work in front of 100 wedding guests. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply a moment of professional respect between 2 people who inhabited a world most civilians didn't fully understand. I stood there, not moving, watching Madeline across the garden. She was talking to someone, her mouth moving automatically, but her eyes stayed fixed on me. Her expression was pure panic mixed with something that might have been humiliation or rage or both. She'd spent the entire weekend telling me I was nobody. She demanded I stay invisible, that I not embarrass her by existing too visibly in her perfect day. And in 30 seconds, the person she'd been most desperate to impress had publicly acknowledged exactly who I was. I wasn't trying to cause a scene. I hadn't sought out the general or engineered the moment. But I also wasn't going to apologize for being recognized for work I'd done. Work that had mattered. Work that had saved lives while Madeline was planning her next social media post. Evan approached me a few minutes later. He looked uncertain, like someone trying to navigate a situation he didn't fully understand. "Julia, I had no idea," he said. "About what?" "About your work. Your rank. Madeline always said you worked in military logistics, and I just assumed." He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. "That was the operation where my father earned his 3rd star. He talks about it sometimes, about how well the joint coordination worked. It was a good team effort. He doesn't usually remember individual officers from operations like that. You must have made an impression." I didn't respond. Evans stood there for another moment, then excused himself to find Madeline. I stayed in the garden, finishing my champagne slowly, watching my sister's perfect day continue around me. The confrontation I'd been bracing for all weekend had arrived, but not in the way I'd expected. Not with an argument or a scene. Just with the simple truth of who I was, spoken by someone Madeline couldn't dismiss or diminish. 30 minutes later, dinner was called. I found my seat at table 12, far from the family, exactly where Madeline had placed me. But I noticed several military families glancing my way now, their expressions respectful. One of Evan's cousins, an army major, stopped by the table briefly to introduce himself and mention he'd read about Pacific Relief in a joint operations course. I was polite, professional, and brief. I had no interest in turning Madeline's wedding into a referendum on her behavior. But I also wasn't going to pretend I was invisible anymore. Not for her comfort. Not for anyone's. The evening continued. Toasts were made. First dances happened. Cake was cut. Through it all, Madeline avoided me completely. She worked the room with the same desperate energy she'd had all weekend, but there was something brittle about it now. Something cracked. When the general made his toast to the bride and groom, he was gracious and warm. He welcomed Madeline to the family, praised Evan's character, and spoke about the importance of partnership and mutual respect. But when he finished and sat down, he caught my eye across the room and gave me a small nod. It wasn't much. Just a gesture of recognition between two people who'd served. But in that room, at that moment, it carried weight Madeline couldn't ignore. I left early, before the dancing wound down. I hugged my parents, congratulated Evan, and walked to my car without saying goodbye to my sister. I'd fulfilled my obligation. I'd been there for her wedding. But I was done pretending her treatment of me was acceptable. Driving away from the venue, I felt something shift in my chest. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not victory. Just a clear, calm certainty that I would never again make myself small for someone who refused to see me clearly. Not even for family. Especially not for family. The text started the next morning while I was packing to leave. 3 from Madeline within 10 minutes, each one escalating in tone. The first was passive-aggressive confusion. I thought you'd at least stay for the farewell brunch. The second was accusatory. Everyone's asking where you went. The third dropped the pretense entirely. We need to talk. I didn't respond immediately. I finished packing, made coffee, and sat on the porch at my parents' house while the morning warmed around me. My flight wasn't until afternoon. I had time. My phone rang. Madeline. I let it go to voicemail. She called again 3 minutes later. I let that one go too. My mother found me on the porch around 900 hours, her face tight with the particular stress of being caught between her daughters. Madeline's very upset, she said carefully. I imagine she is. She wants to talk to you before you leave. I'm sure she does. My mother sat down in the chair beside me, folding her hands in her lap the way she did when she was trying to stay calm. What happened yesterday? Between you and the general. We recognized each other from a previous operation. He said hello. That's it. Madeline says you embarrassed her. I looked at her directly. How did I embarrass her by having someone recognize my work? She didn't mean it like that. She's just very sensitive right now. The wedding was so important to her, and she feels like you made it about yourself. The accusation was so absurd, I almost laughed. I stayed at the back. I didn't talk to anyone unless they approached me. I left early. I did exactly what Madeline asked me to do, which was stay invisible. The only thing I couldn't control was whether other people recognized me. She says you could have downplayed it. That you didn't have to let the general make such a big deal about knowing you. He said hello and mentioned an operation we'd both worked on. It lasted 30 seconds. If that's a big deal, it's because Madeline made it one. My mother was quiet for a moment. She told me what she said to you before the ceremony. About staying away from the general. Did she tell you she called me a nobody? She says she was stressed and didn't mean it. She meant it. She's meant every dismissive thing she's said about me for the past year. The stress just made her say it out loud. My mother looked genuinely distressed. You're sisters. You've always been close. I hate seeing you like this. We haven't been close for a long time, Mom. I've just been too busy making excuses for her to admit it. A car pulled into the driveway. Madeline, still in casual clothes, but carrying the rigid energy of someone preparing for battle. She got out, saw me on the porch, and walked directly toward us. We need to talk, she said again, not bothering with greetings. Then talk, I said calmly. Not here. In private. I stayed where I was. Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Mom. Madeline looked at our mother, then back at me, clearly frustrated that she didn't have the home field advantage she'd expected. Fine. I need you to apologize. For what, specifically? For making my wedding about yourself. For talking to the general when I specifically asked you not to. for embarrassing me in front of everyone. I set down my coffee cup carefully. I didn't talk to the general. He talked to me. I was polite and professional. I didn't seek him out, didn't bring up my work, didn't do anything except respond to him when he recognized me from a previous operation. You could have downplayed it. You could have said you barely remember the operation or that it wasn't important. Why would I do that? Because I asked you to stay out of the way. I did stay out of the way. But I'm not going to lie about my career or dismiss my own work just to make you feel more important. Madeline's face flushed. You've always been like this. Always needing everyone to know how accomplished you are, how special your job is. I've spent 30 years barely mentioning my work to this family, I interrupted. I've downplayed deployments, avoided talking about operations, and let people assume I process paperwork because it was easier than explaining what I actually do. I have never, not once, used my rank to make you feel small. But you've spent the past year making me feel small because you're insecure about marrying into a military family. That's not fair, isn't it? You told people I work in logistics. You asked me not to wear my uniform. You seated me at the back of your wedding with distant cousins. And when I did exactly what you asked, stayed invisible, stayed quiet, you're still angry because someone else chose to acknowledge me. Because it embarrassed me. Why? I stood up, facing her directly. Why does someone respecting my work embarrass you? She didn't answer immediately. Our mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Because it makes me look stupid, Madeline finally said, her voice cracking slightly. Because I spent months telling the Mercer family that you worked in military logistics, nothing important, nothing impressive, and then Evan's father treats you like you're someone significant. It makes me look like I either lied or I'm too stupid to understand my own sister's job. You were too dismissive to ask about my job. There's a difference. I don't need a lecture from you right now. Then what do you need? Because I'm not apologizing for existing, Madeline. I'm not apologizing for someone else respecting me. And I'm definitely not apologizing for the years I spent supporting you while you treated me like an obligation. Supporting me? You've always looked down on me. Always thought you were better because you have some fancy military career. I paid for your college. I helped you get internships. I covered your rent when you couldn't. I paid for your bridal shower venue. I used my leave time to help with your wedding planning. And through all of it, you never once said thank you. You just kept taking while telling yourself I looked down on you. The silence that followed was broken only by birds in the trees and distant traffic. Our mother spoke quietly. Madeline, is that true? Did Julia help you with all those things? Madeline's expression flickered between guilt and defensiveness. She offered. I didn't force her. But did you ever thank her? I don't remember. It was a long time ago. It was 3 months ago that I paid for the bridal shower venue, I said. You texted me that it was the least I could do. Those were your exact words. Madeline's face shifted through several emotions before settling on something harder, more defensive. You have money. You don't have a family or a social life. Helping me gave you something to do. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Not because I hadn't heard versions of it before, but because she said it so easily, like it was simple truth rather than deliberate harm. I have a family, I said quietly. Or I thought I did. And I have a life, a good one actually. It just doesn't look like yours, so you assume it's somehow less valuable. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. And I'm done pretending it's not. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward my car. Madeline followed me down the porch steps. So that's it? You're just going to leave? Yes. What about us? What about our relationship? I stopped at my car door. We don't have a relationship, Madeline. We have a pattern where you take and I give, and when I stop giving, you're angry. That's not a relationship. That's a habit. And I'm breaking it. You're being dramatic. I'm being clear. I'm not participating in family events where I'm treated like an embarrassment. I'm not helping you with projects and then being told it was the least I could do. I'm not shrinking myself so you can feel bigger. If you want a relationship with me, it needs to be based on mutual respect. If you can't do that, then we'll have a polite, distant relationship where we see each other at major family holidays and keep things surface level. You can't just cut me off. I'm not cutting you off. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. She stared at me, genuinely baffled. In her understanding of our dynamic, I was supposed to absorb her behavior indefinitely. The idea that I might stop was outside her frame of reference. Mom, Say something, she finally demanded, turning to the porch. Our mother looked between us, clearly torn. I think you both need some time to cool down. I'm perfectly calm, I said. But I'm also done. Madeline, if you ever want to have an actual conversation where you listen instead of attacking, you know how to reach me. But I'm not going to keep showing up for someone who treats me like I'm worthless. I got in my car and drove away, watching them shrink in the rearview mirror, Madeline standing rigid in the driveway, our mother on the porch steps looking smaller than she should. My phone buzzed with texts for the first hour of the drive. Madeline, our mother, even one from my father that just said, call when you can. I put the phone on silent and focused on the road. By the time I reached the airport, the texts had stopped. I checked in, went through security, and found a quiet corner near my gate. Lieutenant Commander Reyes had sent a message checking on me. I called her back. How'd it go? She asked. I set some boundaries. Madeline's not happy about it. I imagine not. How are you holding up? Honestly? I feel lighter. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long I forgot it was there. Good. That's how you know you made the right call. We talked for a few more minutes about work, upcoming operations, normal life. When we hung up, I sat quietly until they called my flight, watching travelers move through the terminal with their own complicated lives and family dramas. I'd spent 30 years building a career on discipline, clear communication, and accountability. I'd somehow failed to apply those same principles to my relationship with my sister. That ended now. The consequences of that decision were just beginning. The silence lasted 3 days. No texts, no calls, nothing from Madeline or my mother. My father sent one message. Your mother wants to smooth things over. Give her time. I returned to my ship and threw myself into work. We had joint exercises coming up, personnel evaluations to complete, and the usual controlled chaos of command. The rhythm of military life was clarifying after the emotional minefield of the wedding weekend. Lieutenant Commander Reyes pulled me aside the second day back. You seem different. More settled. I set some boundaries with my sister. It went badly. Good badly or bad badly? Depends on your perspective. From my perspective, good. From hers, catastrophic. We were standing on the bridge reviewing navigation charts. Reyes had been my XO for 18 months and understood my command style well enough to know when I needed to talk and when I needed to focus on work. Did she take it well? She asked carefully. She demanded an apology for embarrassing her at her wedding. I declined. She called me dramatic. I left. Sounds like you handled it appropriately. She's convinced I ruined her day by existing visibly. Her father-in-law, a 3-star general, recognized me from a previous operation and said hello. That was the unforgivable sin. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Permission to speak freely? Always. Your sister sounds like the kind of officer who'd spend more time worrying about looking important than actually being competent. We both know how that ends. I smiled despite myself. You're not wrong. The next few days passed in productive blur. Then, on day 6 after the wedding, Evan called me. I stared at his name on my phone screen, debating whether to answer. I hadn't spoken to him since the wedding. I knew whatever he had to say would be complicated. I answered on the 4th ring. Julia, thanks for picking up. Evan. How's married life? Complicated. He paused. I'm calling because I think you should know what's happening. Madeline is struggling. I'm sorry to hear that. My father asked about you at the farewell brunch. When you didn't show up, he mentioned that he'd been hoping to talk more about Pacific Relief. He's writing a retrospective piece on that operation for a journal. Madeline told him you were busy with work. He looked confused and said he'd try to reach out to you through official channels. I waited, sensing there was more. After he left, Madeline told me and my mother that you were trying to undermine her, that you'd deliberately shown off at the wedding to make her look bad. He exhaled slowly. Julia, I've known Madeline for 2 years. I love her. But I've never seen her like this, desperate and defensive and saying things that don't match reality. What did you say to her? I told her that my father recognizing you had nothing to do with undermining her. That you'd been professional and appropriate. She accused me of taking your side. Are you taking my side? I'm trying to understand what actually happened. From my perspective, you showed up to support your sister, got treated badly, and then were blamed when someone acknowledged your work. That's what I saw. What am I missing? Nothing. That's accurate. Then why is Madeline so convinced you deliberately embarrassed her? I thought about how to answer that. Because she spent a long time building a version of me in her head that made her feel better about herself. I was the older sister who hadn't amounted to much, someone who helped when needed but wasn't impressive or important. When reality didn't match that version, she couldn't adjust her understanding. She adjusted her blame instead. Evan was quiet for a long moment. That's not a flattering description of my wife. I'm not trying to be unflattering. I'm trying to be honest. She told me you've always been competitive with her, that you resent her happiness. Evan, I paid for part of her college education and half the cost of her bridal shower. If I resented her happiness, I wouldn't have spent the last decade supporting her life choices. That's what I thought. But she's so convinced. He trailed off. She wants me to ask you to apologize. For what? For making her wedding about yourself? No. Yeah, I figured. To be honest, I think you're right not to. But she's making herself miserable over this. That's her choice, not my responsibility. I know. I just thought you should know what's happening on this end. He paused again. My father asked me about your career. He was surprised I didn't know more details about what you do. He mentioned you're probably on track for 06 within the next few years, if your record stays strong. That's generous of him to think so. Is it true? It's possible. I have a good record and strong evaluations. Selection boards are competitive, but I'm qualified. Madeline told me you worked in logistics. She made it sound like you processed shipping orders. I know. Why would she do that? Because my actual career threatened the narrative she wanted about our relationship. Evan made a sound that might have been frustration or resignation. I need to go. But Julia, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve how she treated you. Thank you. And if my father does reach out to you about Pacific Relief, please respond. He really does respect your work. That wasn't performative. After we hung up, I sat in my quarters staring at the wall. Madeline was spiraling, and part of me felt guilty for not trying to fix it. But I'd spent years trying to fix things between us, smoothing over tensions, absorbing insults, giving without receiving. It had never worked. She'd just taken what I gave and asked for more while respecting me less. Lieutenant Commander Reyes found me in the wardroom that evening. You look like you're thinking too hard. My sister's new husband just called. She's apparently making herself miserable trying to get me to apologize for existing. Are you going to? No. Good. Some people need to learn that other people have limits. Sounds like your sister is getting that lesson the hard way. She's convinced I deliberately embarrassed her. Because admitting she embarrassed herself would require self-reflection. Reyes leaned against the bulkhead. Commander, permission to share a personal observation? Go ahead. You're one of the best officers I've served under. You're calm under pressure, you make good decisions, and you actually care about the people you lead. But you have a blind spot with your family. You let them treat you in ways you'd never accept from anyone else. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're finally setting boundaries that should have been set years ago. Your sister's reaction isn't your problem. It's hers. I just wish she'd understand that I'm not her enemy. She probably never will. Some people need an enemy to explain why their life doesn't look how they want it to. You're convenient for that role. I knew she was right. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were different things. The calls from my mother started on day 8. Gentle at first, checking how I was doing, mentioning that Madeline was having a hard time adjusting to married life, suggesting that maybe we should all have dinner when I had leave. I was polite but non-committal. I wasn't ready to sit through a family dinner where everyone pretended nothing had happened. On day 10, my mother's tone changed. She called while I was reviewing personnel files, her voice tight with frustration. Julia, this has gone on long enough. You need to talk to your sister. I'm happy to talk to her when she's ready to have an actual conversation. She's ready. She's been ready. You're the one being stubborn. Has she said she wants to apologize for how she treated me? Silence. That's what I thought, I said gently. She's hurt, Julia. She feels like you ruined the most important day of her life. I attended her wedding, stayed out of the way, and was polite to everyone I encountered. If that ruined her day, the problem isn't me. You could have tried harder to make her comfortable. I tried for months, Mom. I paid for things, showed up for things, absorbed her stress and her insults. And the day of her wedding, she called me a nobody and told me to stay invisible. I'm not trying harder than that. My mother sighed, that particular sound of parental exhaustion. Can you just apologize so we can all move forward? Move forward to what? To the same pattern where Madeline treats me badly and I'm expected to accept it because family. That's not fair. It's completely fair. And I'm done with it. If Madeline wants a relationship with me, she needs to treat me with basic respect. If she can't do that, then we'll be polite at holidays and nothing more. You're breaking your father's heart. The emotional manipulation was so clumsy I almost laughed. Dad understands what's happening. He told me Madeline has always been intimidated by me. He knows this isn't simple. He wants his daughters to get along. Then he should tell Madeline to stop treating me like an embarrassment. The conversation ended badly, with my mother suggesting I was being selfish and me suggesting she was enabling Madeline's worst instincts. We hung up frustrated with each other, and I immediately felt guilty, not for what I'd said, but for the conflict itself. That night, I called my father directly. He answered on the first ring. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. Mom's upset with me. Your mother doesn't like conflict. She wants everyone to be happy even when that's not realistic. She wants me to apologize. I know. I told her that's not fair to ask. I felt something release in my chest. Thank you. Your sister is struggling, he said carefully. But not because you did anything wrong. She's struggling because she's finally facing some truths about herself she doesn't like. Her new husband is asking questions she can't answer well. His family is polite, but clearly prefers modesty to the kind of performance Madeline's been doing. And her big moment, the wedding, didn't give her the validation she was expecting. What do you think I should do? Nothing. Let her sit with it. Some people need to be uncomfortable before they're willing to change. Madeline's been able to avoid discomfort her whole life because people keep bailing her out. You stopping that is probably the kindest thing you've done for her in years, even if she can't see it yet. Mom thinks I'm being cruel. Your mother thinks any conflict is cruel. She spent 40 years teaching high school students and never once gave someone less than a B, even when they failed. She can't stand the idea of someone feeling bad, even when feeling bad is the natural consequence of their own behavior. We talked for a while longer about his retirement, his hobbies, the garden he was planning. Normal things that reminded me not everything in my family was broken. When we hung up, I felt steadier. I'd made the right call. I just had to trust it enough to let Madeline sit with the consequences of her choices without trying to rescue her from them. For once in my life, I was going to let someone else do the work of figuring out their own problems. For months passed before Madeline reached out directly. In that time, I completed 2 major operations, received commendations from both Navy and Joint Command, and navigated the normal rhythm of service life. I didn't think about my sister often, but when I did, it was with a kind of distant curiosity rather than the old familiar guilt. The message came through text, carefully worded and emotionally neutral. I think we should talk. I'm ready to have a real conversation if you are. I stared at it for a long time before responding. I'm willing to talk. What changed? Her response took 3 hours, a lot of things. Therapy mostly. And Evan asking questions I couldn't answer honestly. We scheduled a video call for the following weekend. I approached it with cautious neutrality, not hopeful, not pessimistic, just careful. When her face appeared on the screen, she looked different. Tired, maybe, or just less performative. Her hair was in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal. She looked more like the sister I remembered from childhood than the polished image she'd been cultivating for years. Hi, she said. Hi. Awkward silence. I've been seeing a therapist, she started. Not because of the wedding specifically, but because everything kind of fell apart after. My relationship with Evan got tense. His family was polite but distant. I couldn't figure out why everything felt wrong when I'd done everything right. I waited, not filling the silence. The therapist helped me see some patterns. About how I relate to people. How I've been treating you. She looked down at her hands. She asked me to make a list of things you've done for me over the years. It was a really long list. Then she asked me to make a list of times I'd thanked you. I couldn't think of any. Madeline, please let me finish. This is hard enough. She took a breath. I treated you like an obligation because I was jealous. Not of your career specifically, but of how comfortable you seemed with yourself. You never needed external validation the way I did. You just were. And I hated that because I couldn't do it. So I told myself you had it easier, that your accomplishments didn't count the same way mine did, that you looked down on me. It was easier than admitting I was insecure. I never looked down on you. I know. That's what Evan kept saying. He couldn't understand why I was so convinced you were trying to undermine me when everything you'd actually done was supportive. She wiped at her eyes. The wedding was supposed to prove something. That I belonged in that world, that I was important, that I'd made it. And when your work got acknowledged, it felt like you were stealing my moment. But you weren't stealing anything. You were just existing, and I couldn't handle that your existence was more impressive than my performance. The honesty of it was startling. I'd expected defensiveness or half apologies that blamed stress or circumstances. This was different. What I said to you before the ceremony was unforgivable, she continued. Calling you a nobody, telling you to stay invisible, I knew it was cruel when I said it. I said it anyway because I was terrified of being shown up at my own wedding. But you didn't show me up. I showed myself up by treating you that way. Why no? I asked quietly. Why tell me this 4 months later? Because it took 4 months to admit it to myself. And because Evan told me last week that his father wants to include you in that retrospective piece about Pacific Relief. He's been trying to reach you through official channels. When he mentioned it at dinner, I realized I was going to spend the rest of my life connected to a family that respects you professionally, and I could either be bitter about that or fix my relationship with you. She met my eyes. I want to fix it. If you're willing. I thought carefully before responding. What does fixing it look like to you? I don't know. Different than before. More honest. I can't promise I won't be jealous sometimes, but I can promise to stop punishing you for it. And I can say thank you for the years you spent supporting me when I didn't deserve it. You deserved it. You just didn't appreciate it. You're right. I'm sorry. For all of it. For how I treated you, for how I talked about you, for making you feel small so I could feel big. She paused. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know I finally understand what I did. The conversation lasted another hour. We talked about her therapy, her marriage, the adjustment to being part of the Mercer family. I talked about work in general terms, about upcoming deployments, about the strange relief of having set boundaries even when they'd caused conflict. When we hung up, I didn't feel the rush of reconciliation or the warmth of restored connection. I felt cautiously hopeful. Like maybe something new could be built, something more honest than what we'd had before. Lieutenant Commander Reyes found me in the wardroom later that evening. You look thoughtful. My sister apologized. Did you accept? I told her we could try something different. Not go back to how things were, but build something new. How do you feel about that? Uncertain. Hopeful. Scared it won't stick. I looked at her. Is that normal? Completely. Real apologies feel different than the fake ones where people are just trying to smooth things over. Sounds like she did some actual work. She said therapy helped her see patterns she'd been avoiding. Then maybe it'll stick. And if it doesn't, you already know how to set boundaries. Over the following weeks, Madeline and I talked regularly but carefully. She asked about my work with genuine curiosity instead of dismissive platitudes. She told me about her marriage without performing perfection. She acknowledged when she caught herself falling into old patterns, comparing, competing, minimizing. It wasn't perfect. Some conversations were still awkward. But it was different. More real. Less performative. General Mercer did reach out about the retrospective piece. I provided input, shared after-action reports, and participated in a recorded interview about the logistics challenges of Pacific Relief. The article was published in a joint operations journal 6 months later. Madeline texted me when it came out. I read it. I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago. Those 8 words meant more than I expected them to. 3 years after the wedding, the promotion list came out. I'd been selected for Captain 06. The notification came through official channels first, then my commanding officer called to congratulate me personally. Lieutenant Commander Reyes, now a full commander herself, organized a small celebration in the wardroom. My XO read the promotion order while officers and senior enlisted gathered around. It was the kind of moment that felt simultaneously ordinary and profound, one more step in a career, but also validation of 3 decades of work. My family called that evening. My father sounded genuinely thrilled. My mother cried and said she wished she understood my work better, but was proud anyway. And Madeline said simply, "You earned this. Congratulations." No qualifiers. No passive-aggressive comments about drawing attention. Just genuine acknowledgement. I told them about the promotion ceremony being scheduled for 2 months out during a port call that coincided with leave time. Without hesitation, Madeline asked when and where, said she'd be there. "You don't have to," I said carefully. "I want to. If that's okay." "It's okay." The ceremony took place on a clear morning with perfect weather. My parents drove in from their town, looking slightly overwhelmed by the formality, but determined to be present. Madeline and Evan flew in the night before. General Mercer was there too, not officially, just as a guest. He'd been invited by my command as a courtesy since our professional paths had continued to intersect over the years. When I saw him in the audience, I felt a moment of anxiety about whether his presence would bother Madeline. But when I glanced at her during the ceremony, she was watching with genuine pride, no tension in her face. Evan had his arm around her. They looked settled, comfortable. After the ceremony, during the reception, General Mercer congratulated me formally and then said quietly, "Your sister speaks highly of you now." "That's good to see. Things have improved," I said simply. Good leadership requires people to acknowledge when they've misjudged something. Sounds like she did that work. Madeline approached as he moved away. We stood together awkwardly for a moment. "This is really impressive," she said, gesturing at the ceremony space, the officers in dress uniforms, the formal military tradition. "I never really understood before. What you do. What all this means. It's just a ceremony." "It's not, though. It represents something. All those years of work, all those decisions and operations and people you've led." She paused. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. You see it now. That's what matters." We didn't hug or have some dramatic reconciliation moment. We just stood together, watching officers and sailors move through the reception, and it felt comfortable. Not perfect, but real. Later, my father pulled me aside. "You look happy." "I am. Not just about the promotion. About everything." He was right. The promotion was satisfying, but the bigger satisfaction was standing in that room with my family, including my sister, and feeling like they finally saw me clearly. Not as a threat or a competitor or someone to manage, but just as who I actually was. Madeline caught my eye across the room and smiled. Not performatively, not anxiously, just a simple smile between sisters who'd found their way back to something honest. The years that followed settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. I took command of a significant operation, led sailors through complex deployments, and continued advancing in my career. Madeline built a more authentic version of her life, less focused on status, more focused on work she actually cared about. She started a small consulting business, helping nonprofits with event planning, using her skills in ways that felt meaningful rather than just impressive. Our relationship remained different than before. We weren't as close as some siblings, but we were honest with each other. We talked regularly, visited when schedules allowed, and navigated family events without the old tension. She asked about my work with genuine interest. I asked about hers the same way. The Mercer family gradually accepted her not as someone performing belonging, but as someone who actually belonged. General Mercer told Evan once, and Evan told Madeline, who told me that he respected how she'd done the work to change. "It takes character to admit you were wrong and actually grow from it," he'd said. 5 years after the wedding, Madeline and Evan had their first child. I flew in for the birth, held my nephew in the hospital, and watched my sister become a mother with the same determination she'd once applied to social climbing. "I don't want him to grow up the way we did," she told me one night while feeding him. "With that weird competition dynamic. What would you want instead? Just honesty. Room for both kids to be who they are without comparison." She looked at me. "I'm going to tell him about you. About your career, about what you've done. I want him to know his aunt is someone impressive. Not because of rank, but because you worked hard and became someone worth respecting." The statement caught me off guard. Thank you. I should have said things like that years ago. I'm saying them now. 7 years after the wedding, I received orders for a senior command position, the kind of assignment that came to officers being groomed for flag rank. Admiral. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was possible. The conversation about it was the first time I allowed myself to seriously consider that trajectory. Lieutenant Commander Reyes, now commanding her own vessel, sent a message when she heard, "You're going to make an excellent admiral. Your sailors are lucky to have you." Captain Marcus Liu, my longtime mentor, called personally, "I always knew you'd make it this far. Don't stop now." And Madeline sent a text that was characteristically her, honest and direct. I Googled what that command position means. It's a big deal. I'm proud of you. Also slightly terrified because I still don't fully understand half of what you do, but mostly proud. I saved that message. Life continued. Operations came and went. Sailors under my command advanced through their own careers. I attended promotion ceremonies for officers I'd mentored, watched them take on increasing responsibility, and felt the particular satisfaction of seeing good leadership perpetuate itself. General Mercer and I crossed paths periodically at Joint Command events. Our interactions were always professional and respectful. Once, at a reception, he mentioned that Pacific Relief Retrospective had become required reading in certain training courses. "Your logistics framework is being taught as a model now," he said. "You should feel good about that." I do. That operation mattered. "Your sister told me you've always been modest about your work. That's rare in senior officers." My sister's understanding of my work has evolved significantly. He smiled. "So I've noticed. Good families adjust when they need to." The truth was, we had adjusted. Not back to what we'd been, that version was gone, but into something more honest and sustainable. Madeline had done genuine work to change her perspective and behavior. I'd held boundaries while remaining open to growth. Our parents had stopped trying to smooth over every tension and started accepting that adult relationships were complex. It wasn't perfect. We still had moments of old patterns emerging, her insecurity, my tendency to minimize myself to make things easier. But we caught those moments now instead of letting them calcify into resentment. On the 10th anniversary of her wedding, Madeline called me from a quiet moment during their celebration. "I was just thinking about that day," she said. "About how badly I behaved. That was a long time ago." "I know. But I remember standing in that garden telling you that you were a nobody and thinking I was protecting myself. I was so scared of being shown up that I tried to make you invisible. It's probably the worst thing I've ever said to someone. You've apologized. We moved past it." "I know. But I want you to know I think about it sometimes. About how close I came to destroying our relationship completely over my own insecurity. If you hadn't held that boundary, if you just kept absorbing my behavior, we'd probably barely speak now. So thank you for not doing that. You did the harder work. You changed. We both did work. That's why it stuck." After we hung up, I sat in my quarters thinking about that conversation. She was right, we'd both done work. But the initial work had been mine, deciding I deserved respect, setting boundaries, refusing to shrink myself for someone else's comfort. That decision had cost something in the short term. Family tension, uncomfortable conversations, the guilt of not being the accommodating older sister I'd always been. But it had built something better in the long term. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than imbalanced obligation. I thought about all the sailors I'd commanded over the years, the leadership principles I'd tried to model, clear communication, accountability, respect for people at every level. I'd applied those principles everywhere except with my own family. Setting boundaries with Madeline had been the moment I'd finally brought those principles home. The wedding had been the catalyst, but the real work had come afterward. The months of sitting with discomfort while Madeline processed her behavior. The careful conversations rebuilding trust. The ongoing effort to maintain something honest rather than sliding back into old patterns. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just the quiet satisfaction of watching someone who dismissed you finally understand who you actually were. And sometimes it was watching them do the work to become someone capable of that understanding. Years from now, if someone asked me about that wedding, I wouldn't talk about the moment the general recognized me or my sister's humiliation. I'd talk about what came after, the hard conversations, the boundary setting, the slow rebuilding of something more honest. Because that was the real story. Not the moment of public recognition, but the private decision to stop accepting less than I deserved. Not the confrontation, but the sustained effort to build something better. I looked out at the ocean beyond my porthole, thinking about command, family, and the ways people grow when they're finally required to. My sister had grown. I'd grown. Our relationship had grown into something neither of us could have predicted that terrible day in the garden. And that, more than rank, more than recognition, more than any vindication, was what actually mattered. The general had been right to say it was an honor to know me. But the real honor was knowing myself well enough to require others to treat me accordingly. That lesson had taken 40 years to fully learn. But I'd learned it. And that's how one wedding day and one sentence from a general reshaped everything I thought I knew about family, respect, and boundaries. If you've ever had someone underestimate you until the truth showed up in the room, how did you handle it? Did you cut them off? Confront them? Or let time reveal who they really were? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want more real stories about standing your ground, recognizing your worth, and refusing to shrink for anyone, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear next.